All right, are you ready? Here we go. It is the annual winter forecast. This, of course, is the long, extended director's cut version of the forecast. The shorter version, much shorter version, kind of the 3-minute version, can be found on wfmj.com/weather and the Storm Tracker 21 app. That's the version I do on television on 21 News at 6, and I'll do it again tonight at 11. But this version is the longer version that has a lot more detail and a lot more science to it. It's kind of for the science and weather nerds, but also for those who just like a lot more detail in their seasonal forecast. Maybe your business depends on winter weather trends. This is the video for you. We've got a lot to talk about, so let's not waste any time and get right to it. First, a quick review of where we've been. So far in 2020, it's been a warm year. Really, April has been the only appreciably cooler than average month so far in 2020. May was a little chillier than average, but just barely. The rest of 2020, every single month has been warmer than average, and by some pretty big margins, especially back in winter and early spring from January through March. All right, when we look at the last several winters, when it comes to snowfall, and this is first flake to last flake. This isn't just a December, January, February. This is from when the first flake flies in the fall to the last one in the spring. We've had two pretty pathetic years for snow in a row now over the last two winters. The Youngstown-Warren Airport averages in the lower 60s for seasonal snowfall totals. We've had under 50 the last couple of years. Now again, that's for the airport, which is in Vienna, in Trumbull County. Tends to be a snowier place than places like Youngstown and Boardman, and certainly once you're down into Columbiana County. Even parts of Mercer County don't pick up as much snow a lot of winters as the areas right around the airport, which tend to get influenced more and more by lake effect snow. So that's where our official climate records are for our area, and so that's where the numbers come from. The airport has had two pretty pathetic years for snow in a row. Now, before this relative snow drought in recent years, we actually have had some pretty snowy winters since the turn of the century. A lot of people remember the 1970s as like the golden age of wintry weather with huge snowfall totals. And yeah, we had some harsh winters back in the 70s, but really ever since 2000, we've had some of our worst winters, and including the snowiest winter on record 10 years ago. In 2010, 2011, we had 118 inches worth of snow at the airport that winter. When it comes to temperatures, we've now had 5 consecutive warmer than average winters, and 7 of the last 9 have been warmer than the average. The closest we've been to average was 3 years ago, 2017, 2018, but that was still a little warmer than average. This 5-year stretch comes on the heels of a couple of pretty cold winters back in 2013, 14, and 2014 into 2015. All right, details on what happened last winter. We had a little switcheroo last winter where November and December basically did kind of a switch, where November was quite cold, actually, and we had a fair amount of snow. December, though, was anything but cold and snowy. It was quite mild, and we had very little snow in the run-up to the holidays. And during the holidays, in the week between Christmas and New Year's last year, it was quite mild. The warm weather continued into January. It was the 7th warmest January on record. And actually, the warm weather, as I just showed you, continued into the month of March. So February and March were quite warm, and then we had kind of a lousy start to spring with the very end of March and much of April being on the chilly side, and that trend continued into early May. The official numbers at the airport last winter, 48.8. That's about 15 inches shy of average for the airport in Vienna. No matter how much snow you got last winter, it was warm everywhere. 5.6 degrees above the average last winter. All right, let's talk about last year's winter forecast. A year ago, right around now, I put out a forecast that said winter was going to be wetter than average. That ended up being okay. It was wetter than average. I also said snowfall amounts would probably be above average. That was no good. We're going to give that an F. The temperature forecast, well, it wasn't good. I'm going to give it a D. It was not as bad as some really cold forecasts that I saw around this time last year. Television meteorologists, a lot of private sector meteorologists had a pretty cold-looking winter forecast. My forecast was not as cold. It called for temperatures to end up coming out in the wash as near average, but that still wasn't very good because, as I just mentioned, we were over 5 degrees warmer than average. So a bust like that begs the question, hey, is this worth it? Can we do this? The answer is yes, we can. There is skill in this. This isn't throwing darts. This isn't flipping a coin. This isn't guessing. Name any cliche that's been hurled at meteorologists that you've come across, and believe me, I've heard them all. None of them are true. We are not just kind of doing this for clicks and hype and just flip of a coin. No, there's skill in this. Not as much skill as your standard 7-day forecast. What's ironic, and I mentioned this last year in the same video, while the standard 7-day forecast that you see me do every night on 21 News at 6 and 11, the skill in that is increasing. 7-day forecasts are much more skillful and accurate than they were even 10, 15 years ago. Not to say anything of 30 years ago. But these seasonal forecasts may be getting a little more difficult because of climate change. The atmosphere and the oceans, both of them, are warming at such a rapid pace that I think it's really throwing a monkey wrench into some of the ways we make these forecasts. And what I'm talking about basically is number one on this list. Kind of the foundation of these forecasts is what we call analogging. It's basically looking back at past data, and we have a lot of it, and looking at years that have similar conditions both in the atmosphere and in the oceans, the ocean water temperatures specifically. Conditions that were similar to this fall and early winter. And we see then what happened during those winters. It's hard to find many winters in the past now that look like the way the oceans and the atmosphere are right now, because it's so much warmer than it used to be. So I think it's making things a little more difficult. We also, in addition to the analogs, we use computer models. We've got a ton of computer models. Some of them go out 12 hours into the future. Some of them go out months into the future. The analog, kind of the analog, if you will, that I like to use, the analogy I like to use with these is computer models are a tool for meteorologists. We have it in our tool belt. They don't make the forecast for us. Just like the hammer in your tool belt is not going to build the house for you. You have to build the house with the hammer. We make these forecasts for the next 12 hours or the next 3 months with the computer models as a tool in our tool belt. We've got other tools as well. And on a little less sciencey note, some of this comes down to experience and intuition, learning from past mistakes. I'm not going to get into why last year's forecast was a bust in this video because it's going to be long enough, but on ericwfmj.com, the blog version of this winter forecast, which will go up this evening, will have a little more explanation on my theory behind why last year's forecast went quite sideways. All right, when it comes to this year's forecast, here are some of the key factors. We have a moderate to strong La Nina in the Pacific Ocean. That's the opposite of El Nino. That's a stripe in the equatorial Pacific of cooler than average waters. I'm going to get into more details on that in a second. Paired up with that, we have unusually warm water in the northern Pacific Ocean. And not only is that a little unusual in any year, but it's really unusual in a pretty strong La Nina. Usually you don't see those things paired up like that. Something called the QBO is positive. We'll talk about that in this video. The polar vortex, that fast-moving river of air in the high altitudes. Typically, its kind of home base is right over the North Pole, but occasionally in the winter, parts of it are going to get dislodged and come southward and bring some cold south. Sometimes that happens in our hemisphere. Sometimes it happens over in Russia. A strong polar vortex tends not to meander as much, and this year's polar vortex is expected to be rather strong this winter, which for the most part may keep a lot of the harsh cold locked up over the northern latitudes, up over the North Pole. All right, La Nina, it's this very important part of the Pacific Ocean where we have cooler than average waters. Well, so what? What does Pacific Ocean water temperatures have to do with how much snow we're going to get or how cold it's going to be? Well, the oceans and the atmosphere kind of play in the same playground, and they're very intimately connected, if you will. The oceans can make the atmosphere do things, and when you have a La Nina, that tends to drive an atmospheric response over North America that precipitation-wise kind of looks like this, where the subtropical jet stream, the branch of the jet that kind of usually lives in Mexico, Southern California, Texas, over to Florida, that's usually pretty weak in a La Nina, so you typically have pretty dry weather in the southern tier of states. It tends to be wetter than average, though, with a stronger northern branch of the jet stream over the Pacific Northwest, parts of the upper Midwest, parts of the Great Lakes states, and around the Ohio Valley as well. Here's a look at the current water temperatures on a global scale. You have your La Nina region right through here. It sticks out like a sore thumb, but here's all that warm water in the northern Pacific. Here's all the warm water in the northwestern Atlantic, all the way down into the Gulf Stream. The oceans are kind of on fire globally. It's hard to find much cool water except for that La Nina zone. All right, let's talk about this thing called the QBO. It's the quasi-biennial oscillation. Kind of a mouthful. This doesn't have anything to do with the oceans. This is an atmospheric thing, and it's not down here where we live. It's way upstairs. This is a river of air that is on the border between the troposphere and the stratosphere. Way up there, above where the airplanes fly. And it tends to live above the equator. Why is this important? Well, it's been shown that this switches directions about every 14 months. When this is blowing in a westerly direction, as it will be this winter, it tends to increase the odds for mild winter weather across the eastern U.S. because a westerly or positive phase of the QBO tends to keep the polar vortex situated over the North Pole more often than not. It doesn't meander southward as often in a lot of positive or westerly QBO seasons. The opposite is true in the easterly phase of the QBO. It tends to increase the chances for colder weather in the eastern U.S. And as I mentioned, we have a westerly or positive QBO this winter, and it is strengthening as well, and that tilts the odds, in addition to a lot of other factors, that tends to tilt the odds in the favor of some warmer weather. All right, here's a look at my analogs, and again, I don't have a super high confidence in a lot of these analogs because some of them are going to be from the 90s and 80s, but I'm putting particularly high emphasis on the most recent analog, 2016-2017. That year we had a weak to moderate La Nina, not as strong as this year, but a weak to moderate La Nina, and we had a pretty warm winter, +5, kind of similar to last year, temperature-wise. But we had actually above average snow that winter, 69.5. Some of these other years were kind of cold winters. 2010-2011 was actually a pretty cold winter, and it was the snowiest winter on record. It could be argued that 2010-2011 was the harshest winter on record for our area, with that amount of snow and temperatures 4 degrees below the average. Even though that's on this list, I'm not weighing it nearly as heavily as I am 2016-2017, because things are quite different in the oceans this year than 10 years ago, with the exception of the La Nina zone. A lot of our oceans were quite a bit cooler in that winter, so I don't think it's a very good match. Some of these other years, 1998-99, 2007-2008, were a little on the mild side, but pretty snowy. We had a couple of lower years for snow in 95, 96, and also in 88, 89. Back in that winter of 2016-2017, here's a look at what happened temperature-wise across the lower 48 states. Basically, east of the Rockies, it was a warm winter. Most of the cold was locked up in the Pacific Northwest. Keep this map in mind as we get to the forecast later on in the video. When we throw all of my analog years in the hopper and do a composite map, here's what that looks like. So all the years I just showed you are represented on this map. It's not that different than 2016-17. The reason partly for that is I've kind of quadruple weighted 2016-2017 because I do think it's the best match for this winter season. So some of those other years only get a weight of 1, if you will, whereas I'm basically weighing 2016-2017 4 times. All right, here's the forecast precipitation-wise. Pretty classic moderate to strong La Nina stuff here. Dry in the southern tier of U.S., wetter than average in the Pacific Northwest and around the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley, including around here. Precipitation above the average, but that's all precipitation, not just snow. That doesn't mean snow will be above the average. In fact, here's my snow forecast. Now, of course, higher amounts to the north because we get more lake effect snow in places such as Greenville and Kinsman and over towards Sandy Lake. We don't get as much lake effect once you're down into Mahoning and especially down into Columbiana County. That's why amounts are always higher in the north. But no matter where you are on this map, I'm expecting your backyard to see more snow than last winter. That's not exactly a real bold forecast because some places probably had 20 to 25 inches of snow in our area last winter. We had 48 at the airport, but while we don't have any official measurements in a place like Lisbon, Salineville, East Palestine, up to Columbiana, my guess is a lot of those places had between 20 and 25 inches last winter, way below average. Probably more this year, but still below average. I'm saying below average because warm air, I think, is going to win the battle more often. But I do think there's an increased risk this winter of a couple of bigger events. Not only did we not have much snow at all last winter, we had almost no big ticket, big classic snowstorm events. I think even though snow events are going to be pretty infrequent this winter, we're not going to see snow at a very high frequency. We may go long stretches where it doesn't snow a flake this winter. The chances that occasionally we get hit with a pretty decent-sized snowstorm, I think, are a little higher. And that's pretty typical of a La Nina. Temperature-wise, this is no surprise. If you've been following what I've been hinting at in recent videos and what I've been talking about on Weather for Weather Geeks and things like that, it's no surprise that I'm expecting a warmer than average winter. I've put 60% odds on the most likely outcome being a warmer than average winter, perhaps of a similar flavor to last winter and the winter of 2016-2017. Both of those winters were about 5 degrees warmer than average. But I'll tell you, I think there's a 1 in 4 chance, a 25% chance, that this winter is so warm that it's going to end up in the top 5 here locally. Now, in Ohio, last year was a top 5 warm winter, but I'm talking about specifically here locally. It could be a top 5 winter, even warmer than last year. I think there's about a 1 in 4 chance of that happening, a non-negligible chance. I don't think it's the most likely outcome, but I would not bet against this. 15% chance of this kind of an outcome. Not a cold, harsh winter like 2010, 2011, but maybe a more typical winter, a return to form, where the cold air is able to come south and east with a little more frequency than I think is likely right now. This is something that we can't rule out. This is a non-zero chance kind of a winter. I don't think this is likely at all. I've only put 15% odds on it, but it's something that I can't rule out. I think the coldest scenario at this point that I could see being realistic for us is that it's an average winter temperature-wise. I don't think it's very likely at all, but of all the outcomes I could see, this is about as cold as I think it could be. How's our confidence on this forecast? The drivers of the forecast, La Nina, that positive QBO, things like that, we have high confidence that those things are going to continue to exist this winter and continue to influence the pattern. My confidence as far as temperatures go, I have medium. I could put it at medium to high. I'm pretty darn confident this is going to be a warmer than average winter. Now, is it 3 degrees warmer than average or 6 degrees warmer than average? That's where the medium kind of comes into this. I'm not real confident splitting those hairs just yet. Low confidence on the snow totals because while overall the flavor of the winter is going to be warm, I think, again, we could have a couple of pretty big-ticket events that escalate the totals. It may be perceived as this really snow-free, warm winter because it's not going to snow very often. But we may have a couple of decent-sized snowstorms that drive the totals up. And so my confidence in how much exactly your backyard may see this winter is not that high, even though right now I do think that most backyards will see a little more than we did last year. As far as the impacts go, as far as school adjustments in the days of COVID, hard to say if snow days are even going to still be a thing going into the future. So hard to say about that. But when it comes to a lot of other impacts to daily life as far as our winter weather forecast goes, medium confidence that we'll have occasional impacts, but it won't be as impactful as some. Your heating bills likely will not be as high as an average winter or a harsh winter at all. It should be another pretty easy winter, relatively speaking, when it comes to the cost of heating your home. When we look at kind of a grid here of things go drier as you go up the scale here, they go snowier as you go down, colder to the left, warmer to the right. I think this winter will fall kind of right in here compared to last winter. Not as snow-free necessarily as last winter, but probably close to last winter as far as temperatures go. And as I mentioned, there's a non-negligible chance that this year is quite a bit warmer. All right, so bottom line, summing things up, another warm winter, very likely, possibly as warm as last year, possibly even warmer. January and February, I think, can be particularly mild at times. If we have a month in meteorological winter that may be more typical of winter, may have fairly frequent snow events and shots of cold, that may be in December, especially mid to late December. Early December, at this very early stage, does not look particularly cold, a month ahead of time. But the pattern may loosen up enough that December ends up being colder and snowier than last year. January and February, though, we could have really long stretches of mild and snow-free weather. Snow, again, fairly infrequent, but a few sizable storms will be a possibility. All right, we're coming up on the 20-minute mark of this video. That's going to be enough. You can watch this 3 months from now and grade my forecast. I will post on ericwfmj.com this evening a written version, a blog version of the forecast, and I may even do a Facebook Live to answer your questions about this winter forecast coming up this evening. And this forecast will continue to live on for some time on wfmj.com/weather and my YouTube channel as well. And you can find it in my Facebook feed if you look long enough. You can find it. It will live in perpetuity. I never delete any videos, even if the forecast goes bad. You can go find it on these outlets: YouTube, Facebook, wfmj.com/weather. Thanks for watching this extended version of the winter forecast, and good luck to you and yours this winter season.